The crowd was ready to condemn her. But what happens when judgment meets unexpected mercy? Why do people so often carry stones in their hands before understanding the full story? And what does it reveal when the one who is without sin chooses not to accuse? The morning light had not fully settled over Jerusalem. The city was already awake, already moving, already filled with voices and footsteps echoing through narrow streets and stone courtyards. And in the middle of that movement, something unusual was happening. A crowd was forming, not around celebration, not around teaching, but around a woman. She had been brought forward publicly, exposed in front of everyone. There was no privacy, no dignity, no space to hide, only silence and expectation. The religious leaders stood nearby. They were confident, certain. Their voices carried authority as they said, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." The words were sharp, direct, designed to leave no room for doubt. But underneath their accusation was something deeper, a test. They were not only judging her, they were watching him. They wanted to trap Jesus. If he showed mercy, they could accuse him of breaking the law. If he agreed with punishment, they could challenge his message of compassion. It was a situation designed for conflict, a moment built for division. And yet, Jesus did not respond immediately. He bent down and began to write on the ground. This moment is often overlooked, because in a situation filled with urgency and tension, his response is silence. Not avoidance, not fear, but deliberate stillness. The crowd waited, the accusers waited, the woman waited. And in that waiting, something important begins to shift. Because silence in moments like this is not empty, it is reflective. It slows the urgency of judgment. It interrupts the momentum of condemnation. It creates space where truth can breathe. The people wanted an immediate answer, but Jesus chose presence over reaction. He chose awareness over pressure. He chose depth over speed. Finally, they pressed him again. They demanded a response. So Jesus stood up and he said something simple but powerful. "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Those words did not erase the law. They did not ignore wrongdoing, but they changed the position of the accusers. Suddenly, judgment was no longer abstract. It became personal. Before, they were observers. Now they were participants. Before, they were pointing outward. Now they were invited inward. One by one, the atmosphere shifted. The oldest first, then the rest. Slowly, quietly, stones began to fall to the ground, not thrown, not used, just released. Because something had changed inside them. The certainty they carried began to crack under the weight of reflection. And in that silence, only two remained, Jesus and the woman. Everyone else had stepped away. The crowd that came ready to condemn had dissolved. And now the one who was accused stood alone in the center of grace. Jesus straightened up and asked her a question. "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" Her answer was simple. "No one, sir." Then Jesus said something that has echoed through generations. "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." This moment holds both truth and mercy, not one without the other, not judgment alone, not permission alone, but transformation. Because what Jesus offers here is not denial of wrongdoing, it is the possibility of a new beginning. The law had been used as a weapon, but Jesus restored it to its deeper purpose. Not destruction, but restoration. Not humiliation, but healing. This passage forces us to look at a deeper reality about human nature. It is easy to see mistakes in others. It is easy to gather in groups and form conclusions. It is easy to feel justified when standing in agreement with others. But Jesus disrupts that pattern. He brings attention back to the individual heart, not just the action, but the condition behind it. Because condemnation is often simpler than understanding. It requires less reflection, less humility, less honesty. But mercy requires something different. It requires awareness of one's own humanity. The ability to recognize that no one stands above grace. The woman in this story had no defense, no argument, no way to explain her situation in front of the crowd. Everything about her was exposed. But Jesus does not meet exposure with shame. He meets it with restoration. And that changes everything. Because in that moment, she is no longer defined by the worst moment of her life. She is seen as someone still capable of change, still capable of growth, still capable of walking forward differently. The accusers had defined her by her failure, but Jesus defines her by her future. That shift is profound. because it reveals how differently God sees people compared to human judgment. Human judgment often freezes people in their past, but divine mercy opens a path forward. There is also something deeply important about what happens to the crowd. They arrive confident, certain of their moral position, ready to act, but they leave quietly, individually, because truth does not always shout. Sometimes it dissolves certainty in silence, and that silence becomes more powerful than argument. Each person who held a stone was confronted not by accusation, but by reflection, and reflection led to release, not because sin no longer mattered, but because self-awareness had entered the moment. And that changed how judgment functioned. Jesus remains with the woman, not to shame her, not to ignore what happened, but to restore her direction. Go now. Those two words carry weight. They are not just permission, they are invitation. To step into a different path, to leave behind what had trapped her, to move forward with a new understanding of life. And then comes the instruction, leave your life of sin. This is important, because mercy is not the absence of truth. It is truth delivered without destruction. Jesus does not say what you did doesn't matter. He says now you can live differently. That is transformation, not avoidance, not denial, but change. Real change begins not in fear of punishment, but in encounter with mercy. When someone experiences grace, it reshapes motivation, not because of external pressure, but because of internal shift. The woman leaves this moment not as someone condemned, but as someone restored. And that is the heart of this passage. But this story also speaks to those holding stones, because it asks a difficult question. What do we do when we are in the position of judgment? Do we rush toward condemnation, or do we pause long enough to see ourselves honestly? Because before anyone can throw a stone outward, they must first examine what is inside. This does not remove accountability, but it reshapes posture. It shifts judgment from reaction to reflection, from impulse to understanding, from superiority to humility. And in that shift, something important happens. Space opens for mercy. This passage does not encourage ignoring wrongdoing. It reveals the difference between condemnation and restoration. One destroys, the other transforms. One ends a story, the other continues it. And Jesus consistently chooses restoration. Not because sin is insignificant, but because people are more than their sin. As we reflect on this moment, we see two groups transformed. The crowd who came to accuse leave without judgment, and the woman who came condemned leaves without shame. Both are changed, but in different ways. One through realization, the other through grace. And at the center of both is Jesus. Calm, steady, present, not reacting out of pressure, not influenced by manipulation, but guided by truth and mercy together. That balance is rare and powerful, because it shows that justice and compassion are not enemies. They are meant to work together. In proper alignment, they reveal the character of God. And that character is what this story ultimately points to. A God who sees fully, yet restores gently. A God who does not ignore truth, but applies it with wisdom. A God who does not condemn without invitation to change. And a God who always leaves space for a new beginning. So when we look at this story, we are not just observing an ancient event. We are being invited into reflection. How do we see others? How do we respond to failure? How do we handle moments when judgment feels easy? And more importantly, what do we do with our own need for grace? Because at some point, every person stands in a similar place, not necessarily in a crowd with stones, but in the awareness of imperfection. And in that moment, the question becomes personal. Do we expect condemnation? Or do we trust in mercy? Jesus shows us that grace does not erase truth. It fulfills it in a deeper way. It does not excuse the past, it creates a future. And that future is what he offers here, to the woman, to the crowd, and to anyone willing to listen. A chance to begin again, with truth, with mercy, with hope, and with a new direction forward. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs encouragement today.